In the spring of 1873, travelers on the Osage Trail in Kansas started disappearing, not losing their way, not dying of exposure, just vanishing. Horses found wandering riderless on the open prairie. Wagons abandoned mid-trail with personal belongings still inside. Men who had told people exactly where they were going and never arrived. For months, nobody connected the disappearances. The frontier was a big place. People died out there all the time in ways that left no explanation. Authorities shrugged. Communities moved on. Then a family of 4 was seen entering a small roadside inn on the prairie, and a search party found what was underneath it. Welcome to Frontier History Archive, where we explore the real stories of survival and life at the edge of civilization. The Bloody Benders are one of the most disturbing stories the American frontier ever produced. Not because of frontier mythology or exaggeration, but because of how ordinary they looked. John Bender Sr. was a heavy-set German immigrant in his 60s, quiet, unremarkable. His wife, known only as Ma Bender, was described by neighbors as intense, strange, and impossible to warm to. Their son John Jr. was awkward and odd, but not immediately threatening. Their daughter Kate was something else entirely, charming, educated, fluent in English. She was known locally as a spiritualist who gave public lectures on the supernatural. In 1871, they settled on a plot of land along the Osage Trail in Labette County, Kansas, and built a small inn, one room, a canvas curtain dividing the sleeping area from the dining area, a trapdoor in the floor. Travelers on the Osage Trail stopped regularly. The road was heavily used. Settlers, merchants, cattle drivers moving west. A roadside inn offering a meal and a bed was a welcome sight after days on the open prairie. The Benders were welcoming enough. Kate, in particular, had a way of making guests feel comfortable. She seated travelers with their backs to the canvas curtain. She served food and conversation in equal measure. What happened next happened fast. By early 1873, enough people had gone missing along that stretch of trail that the disappearances could no longer be ignored. A prominent local doctor named William York had vanished in March after telling his brother exactly which route he was taking. His brother began his own investigation. He visited the Bender inn personally, spoke with the family, noticed nothing, and left. He was one of the lucky ones. In May 1873, neighbors noticed the Bender property had gone quiet. Livestock were starving in the field. The inn was empty. The family was gone. A search party went in. The smell hit them before they reached the building. Inside the inn, they found the trapdoor. Below it, a shallow pit, soaked in dried blood. Outside, the ground around the property was soft and recently disturbed in multiple locations. They started digging. 11 bodies all killed the same way. A massive blow to the back of the skull delivered through the canvas curtain. Throats cut afterward. Some of the bodies showed signs of having been dropped through the trapdoor while still alive. One of the bodies was Dr. York. One was a little girl, 8 years old. The evidence suggested she had been buried alive. The frontier, which thought it had seen everything, went cold. The news spread across Kansas like fire through dry grass. Within days, posses were forming. The governor offered a reward. Colonel York assembled his own group of riders. The Benders had maybe a 2-week head start. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in frontier history. Hundreds of men covering enormous distances. Telegraph lines carried descriptions to towns across the region. Newspapers ran their names from Kansas City to Chicago. The Benders had simply disappeared into the same landscape that had swallowed their victims. Every lead died cold. A wagon was found abandoned near the Indian Territory border. Tracks dissolved into the open grassland. Several people reported seeing a family matching their description boarding a train heading east. Others reported them heading west. The official investigation ground to a halt within months. No arrests, no confirmed sightings, but Kate Bender became a particular obsession. She was young, educated, and charismatic. The combination of those qualities with her crimes created a profile that the Victorian public found simultaneously terrifying and compelling. Criminologists have noted something significant about the family's operation that gets lost in the sensationalism. It was systematic. The layout of the inn, the canvas curtain, the specific seating arrangement, the trapdoor was not improvised. It was designed. Someone in that family had thought carefully about how to maximize the efficiency of what they were doing while minimizing the risk of detection. The selection of victims showed pattern recognition. They favored solitary travelers, men traveling alone with visible signs of money or valuable goods. They avoided large groups. They avoided people who were too locally well-known. They operated for nearly 2 years before anyone connected the disappearances. 2 years. On a heavily traveled road, in a settled county with neighbors and regular community contact. The ordinariness of it is the most disturbing part. They attended community events. Kate gave her spiritualist lectures in nearby towns. John Jr. was considered odd but harmless. Ma and Pa Bender were simply the quiet couple who ran the inn on the trail. Nobody suspected because nobody wanted to suspect. The frontier community around them had built a social fabric of basic trust, the same trust that made roadside inns possible, that allowed strangers to share meals and sleeping spaces, that kept the long, lonely miles of the trail from being completely terrifying. The Benders had used that trust like a weapon. In the decades after the Bender disappearance, 2 women were arrested in Detroit, claiming to be Ma Bender and her daughter Kate. the case became a sensation all over again. Colonel York, still alive, still hunting, traveled to Detroit to identify them personally. He said they were not the Benders. The women were released. They disappeared back into ordinary life. Whether York was right, whether he was protecting someone, or whether the identification process was simply too compromised by time, nobody determined conclusively. Over the following decades, multiple women across the country were arrested or accused of being Kate Bender. Each case collapsed under scrutiny. Several credible accounts emerged, suggesting that Colonel York's posse had actually caught the Benders shortly after the discovery, that they had been taken out onto the open prairie and quietly executed, their bodies left in an unmarked location. The whole affair buried to avoid a lengthy public trial that nobody wanted. If true, it would explain everything. The complete absence of confirmed sightings. The lack of any credible trail leading anywhere. The strange reluctance of certain posse members to discuss what happened during those first weeks of pursuit. York himself never confirmed or denied it. He died without making any definitive statement about the fate of the family he had spent years hunting. The prairie kept the secret either way. The Bender property was torn apart by souvenir hunters within weeks of the discovery. Pieces of the cabin, fragments of the canvas curtain, splinters of the infamous table. The frontier public had a complicated relationship with its own darkness, repulsed and fascinated in equal measure. The land itself was eventually sold, resettled, farmed. The shallow pit was filled in. The trail moved on the way trails always do, but the bloody Benders left something behind that couldn't be buried or sold off in pieces. They had exposed something uncomfortable about frontier life, that the optimistic narrative of westward expansion preferred not to examine. The isolation that made the frontier feel like freedom also made it extraordinarily vulnerable. The vast distances between communities, the absence of reliable law enforcement across enormous territories, the culture of basic trust between strangers that frontier travel required, all of it created conditions that a sufficiently cold and calculating family could exploit almost indefinitely. The Benders didn't invent evil on the American frontier, but they demonstrated with terrible efficiency exactly how much damage a small group could do. Criminologists and historians who study the development of serial violence in America return to the Benders regularly. 11 confirmed victims, possibly more, places them in a category that later cases would far exceed in scale. The Bloody Benders operated in 1872 and 1873. Jack the Ripper didn't occur until 1888, 15 years later. The Benders were doing it first. As a family unit, with a purpose-built killing system, years before the concept entered public consciousness. There was no framework to understand what they were. The investigators who walked through that in 1873 had no professional language for it. They were looking at something that wouldn't have a name for another century. Labette County, Kansas is quiet farmland today. The Osage Trail is gone, replaced by county roads and state highways. There is a small historical marker somewhere in the area, easy to miss, easy to drive past without stopping. The Bloody Benders entered American folklore almost immediately, appearing in dime novels, newspaper serials, and traveling shows. Kate Bender in particular became a recurring character because she didn't fit any available category. She was educated, presentable, socially functional, and she had sat across a table from victims, making them feel welcome. That specific combination, normalcy as a weapon, is what makes the Bender story feel modern. It belongs to a tradition of American darkness. The frontier ended. The pattern didn't. Every frontier story is partly about what happens when civilization thins out. When the law is days away instead of minutes. When the social structures that constrain human behavior simply don't exist in the same form. The Benders showed what the frontier looked like from the perspective of people willing to use its vulnerabilities without mercy. Freedom and danger are not opposites. They are the same thing, seen from different angles. The Benders understood that, and then they walked back into the invisibility of the prairie and were never seen again.